Hi, I'd like to introduce you to this weird little trapezoidal tool called the Ames lettering guide and talk to you about how to use it for lettering comics. So it has this circle or wheel that's movable. You can rotate it around here, and that allows you to adjust the size of your lettering. It also has a bunch of little holes located in it that if you look closely you can see that these holes are in rows. There are 4 different rows of holes on the circle, and they are labeled. This first one says 2/3. If we skip this next row, the third one says 3/5. The 3/5 and the 2/3 row both have these little curvy lines or parentheses that connect the first and the third holes, first and third, first and third, first and third holes. And those are the ones that you want to pay attention to. Those are going to be your top line and your base line for your text. Now, I mentioned that you're able to control the height of your letters, and if you look down here, there's a little tick mark that corresponds to a number on the wheel itself, and these numbers go from 2 to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up to 10. And these units are in 30 seconds of an inch. So these are not point sizes. Point sizes are in 70 seconds of an inch. So you might have to do some math in order to get the font size that you want. But I'm going to start out with a 5 on the Ames lettering guide. I line up this 5 with a tick mark right on the bottom of the circle. And if you look up in the top left portion, there is another tick mark up here. This is a check because there is another series of numbers up here. So it goes from 2 to 10 in this arc. Then again, it goes from 2 to 10 in this arc. And whatever your number is down here, it should also check out on this tick mark right up here. So I see that my 5 down here corresponds with 5 up here. The reason we have 2 tick marks is to avoid inadvertently switching this thing around and having it rotate the opposite way. And if we lined it up with a 5 down here and we think we're ready to go, look up here, oopsies, there's no corresponding number. So we know, okay, we've got to turn this thing around. So here I am at the 5 on the Ames lettering guide, and this tool does not function independently. It functions in conjunction with a straight edge or a ruler. It doesn't have to be a ruler. You don't have to use measured increments so long as it's straight. And the way this works is basically you take this Ames lettering guide and you slam it up against the edge of your straight edge, and it's going to move back and forth, and that's how we're going to create our guidelines. So the first thing we want to do is to get our straight edge flush level with the edge of our panel borders. So once you've done that, we can put our Ames lettering guide here, and I'm taking a blue lead mechanical pencil, non-reproducible blue lead, so that I can use that to make some guidelines, and then those blue lines will not appear in my final scan. So I'm going to put the pencil in the first hole. Remember, we're only using the first and the third holes in the 2/3 or the 3/5 setting. There's first and third, then I move up again. Here's the first. I see the next hole connected with the parentheses is the third hole. First and third. And there are my guidelines for my text. So you'll see that there are different spacing between the lines that I've just created. There are some large spaces between the lines. That's where my text is going to go. And then there are some tiny spaces between the lines. That is the space in between my text. So now I can go ahead and letter whatever goes inside my speech balloon. Remember to keep your letters roughly square and really be deliberate about making each ligament. We're not chicken scratching something out and creating a grocery list. We are hand lettering a comic book. So we want this to be very legible. So I'll go ahead and start writing. And you'll see I'm very deliberately trying to pick up my hand after each ligament. And I'll write, hello, how are you? Okay, so right now we are in the penciled stage, which means you can sort of step back at this point and take a look at what's going on here. Is it centered appropriately? Is it laid out the way you want it to be? Right now it looks like this second line is pushed further over to the left than I want it to be. It doesn't hang over very far on the right-hand side, but then it hangs over quite a bit on the left-hand side. So you can do one of a couple things. You can either erase what you have and rewrite it, or you can rewrite it directly on top since you're not going to see the blue line anyway, or you can just go in to the inks with the understanding that you're going to start a little further over to the left. So I think that's what I'm going to do just to avoid any additional time on this video, but we're missing something. One thing we need around our text is a speech balloon. And remember, our speech balloons should be about a letter's width distance away from the text. So remember, each letter occupies roughly the area of a square. Just think about a square next to your letters and make a little mark out there. Thinking about a little square, and I'm remembering that this is going to be a little further out this way, so I'm moving a little further out, and I'm going to make a little tick mark. Okay, and then I want to think about a letter's width distance away from the top and a letter's width distance away from the bottom, and I've got my 4 tick marks. Now once I have these 4 tick marks, I can sort of start pushing these lines out, sort of thinking about that elliptical shape, that slightly squared ellipse that I'm trying to craft. And before you know it, they're going to connect to one another to form that quadrant of the balloon. So let's do that again. I'm going to start pushing downward a little bit and curving in. I push outward a little bit and start curving up. And even though this is not complete, I can already sort of see it in my mind's eye. I can see that curve starting to form in my mind's eye. And again, this is just the penciled stage. So you can always step back and evaluate and think to yourself, do I have a roughly symmetrical ellipse, or is this kind of pooching out a little farther than I'd like it to? If so, just repencil it to where you would like that curve to be. Okay, so same thing on the other quadrants. I'm going to push this down a little bit, I'm going to push this over a little bit, and by golly, before I know it, those 2 lines start to connect. And again, up over here, out over here, and I'm sort of trying to evaluate as I go and make it roughly symmetrical. Okay, so there is my slightly squared elliptical balloon. And we also want to make a tail for our balloons. Now remember, tails, at least in the modern convention, are curved on the inside and almost straight on the outside curve. So the tail also needs to point to a person's mouth. So I'm going to create just a little dummy character over here so that we know who is doing the talking. And we want the middle of the balloon to connect with the person's mouth who is doing the speaking. And I'll just make a light line so that we know where that tail is going to go. And then remember that we usually stop the tail about halfway between the tail, halfway between the balloon and the character themselves. So now I can craft that curved inside curve of the tail and the almost straight outside of the tail. And now I have my balloon penciled. All right, so I've been working in this blue mechanical pencil, non-reproductive blue pencil, this whole time. And we mentioned before that comic artists draw everything twice. So there's one time. The second time is going to be in ink. And I'm going to take a fixed width pen for this. And I'm going to start inking my lettering. So again, you want to be very deliberate with each ligament you pick up your pen so that it creates a very clear and legible piece of text. So I'll go ahead and start inking. I'm picking up my pen after each ligament of a piece of text. Remembering to keep each letter roughly square in shape. That makes it so that your text is super legible, really easy to read. And there's my text, inked. And I'm noticing now that I forgot to remind myself that I needed to push this text over a little bit. So I tried to expand it a little bit, but because of that, I don't really have a letters width distance between the text and the balloon wall on the side. So I'm going to repencil my balloon ever so slightly over here before I ink the balloon shape itself. Okay, so now I'm ready to ink the balloon. And I just want to talk a little bit about inking techniques. You know, we're trying to create this nice, smooth, sweeping curve on the balloon itself. And when you're writing, you have a lot of really intricate points of articulation in your hand, in your fingers. And those allow you to make a lot of minute movements like we saw in the lettering. But for a balloon, we really want to isolate those points of articulation and not move them at all. We have other points of articulation like the wrist, which allows you to make a nice swooping curve. And if you need to make a larger curve, you can curve at your elbow or even your shoulder if you're drawing something really large. This is pretty small, so I'm going to stick to my wrist as a point of articulation when I'm making the curve for the balloon. Now when I'm inking the curve of the balloon, I'm thinking about how far I can make that curve, and really my wrist can only curve about 90 degrees. That's okay. You don't have to do the entire 360 degrees of the balloon, just do 90 degrees and then turn your page and continue inking. Okay, so I'm going to start down here next to the balloon tail, and I'm going to keep my fingers still, and I'm only moving my wrist until I get to about the 90-degree mark, and then I just let go, because after that I'm going to start contorting my body and the line is going to get all wiggly. So I'm turning my page. I do my best to pick up my line where I left off, trying not to make any crossovers or hiccups or gaps where I was picking up that line. I'm moving my wrist, and as I come to a point where I stop moving my wrist, I'm picking up my pen and turning my page again. Do this for the remaining quadrants. And then, same procedure applies for the balloon tail. So I'm going to think about where is my point of articulation. It's in the wrist. I want that nice smooth curve. So I'm starting at the bottom and working my way to the top to connect that line. And then finally, a very, very slight curve, almost straight on the outside of the tail. And there you have it, your finely handcrafted balloon tail.